Welcome. Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Oh my gosh, we got so many people streaming in from literally all over the globe, as per our tradition here on Tiny Webinars. Let me know where in the chat where you're coming from. I'm from Seattle. David's coming in from Seattle. Dr. Voyles from San Diego area, but we've had folks literally all over the world, as far as South Africa, India, Saudi Arabia with us today. Looking forward to hearing folks. Just drop in that chat in the bottom of your Zoom. We'll make a great use of those tools this morning. We've got a sweet poll question for you. Go ahead and answer that one. It's important that you're a part of how we shape the discussions today. Be sure, if you do drop your response in the chat, send it to everybody. Don't just send it to yourself. You'll find me talking to myself a lot on the show, but I love to hear where you're coming from. And we'll get started in another 60 seconds or so, folks. We got still, excuse me, we got folks coming in. And get situated and get your tea, coffee, adult beverage refreshed. Amazing. If you are on the social media, open up that new tab. Say hello to TINYpulse at TINYpulse. I see every single one, so I'd love to give you that lightning bolt, fist bump, bicep, awesome. Whichever emoticon you like to see. Shout out Glasgow, UK. Thanks for being here late on your Thursday. Love seeing you. Oh my gosh, we still got folks streaming in. Welcome in, everybody. Hit that poll question. Let me know where you're coming from. I did see some attendees from Italy today. As we scroll through here. Georgia, the country, Georgia. Hello. Let us know if you're in. We'll give another 20 seconds or so, folks. We still got people coming in, and we'll kick this off. Shout out Susan from Virginia. One of my favorite places on earth. Hello from Chicago. Maggie, hello. I went to UFC.
I went to NIU, which was about 60 miles west of Chicago, but like it was always a treat to go there.
My last name is NIU as well.
And Maggie, I hear you're getting some like high wind and cold, I think, like through Chicago and the Midwest.
Light up that chat, folks. We're going to get started here. I'm going to close our first poll. We'll jump into that in just a second. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tiny Webinars. Today, we're jumping into well-being assessments. Oh my gosh, exciting. You're going to learn the science behind well-being assessments, what makes them effective, and the real impacts of running one in your organization. And then finally, the benefits to you and your team. They're so real. Tiny webinar coming up in January, the state of employee engagement, January 13th. We're going to mash up all of the data, all of the findings, all of Dr. Voyles' and David's research, all of the research you need to have an informed conversation with your leadership team on returning to work, what you need to do to address things like turnover, possibly due to the Great Resignation. We'll find out, we'll see what the data says, along with what you need to build the right policies in your organization, potentially vaccine mandates and other policies to help increase the happiness and engagement within your organization. If you want me to sign you up, just drop in the chat, state of employee engagement. I got you. I'll take care of it. You don't have to do anything. Before I hand it over to David New, founder of TINYpulse, chat and Q&A in the bottom of your Zoom screen. light that up this morning. We'll answer some of those live in Q&A, and we'll also leave some time at the end of today for some Q&A. Again, we got those sweet poll questions to help guide the day's discussion. So if you see that pop on your screen, be sure to answer those. And then at the end of today, or if you have to exit early, please share your feedback on today's session. We read every single piece of feedback. TINYpulse, after all, is a feedback company that really does help us make better content for you. Follow TINYpulse on LinkedIn for invites to more events just like this, or next month's State of Employee Engagement. And I'll pass it over to TINYpulse founder David New, hosting Dr. Elora Voyles, people scientist, IO psychologist for TINYpulse. David, super glad to have you here today. What have you got for us?
Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure to be here. And, first, just start with some context. If you and your organization are not talking about well-being, then it would be almost a surprise to me. All the research and data that we've seen, this is more and more important. And also, if you're at a larger organization, it's probably you already have probably some type of well-being program already in place. And if you're small, all the research says that you want to have something there because of everything that's happening in the world right now. And that's one of the reasons why the combination of TINYpulse and Limeade, the company who acquired TINYpulse, is so great, is because they're a market leader when it comes to well-being. And in fact, at TinyCon, I even talked about this, about how we're going to bring some of those insights into the TINYpulse product. And many of you who are attendees, I see familiar names. I even interviewed personally about understanding more about how you folks are thinking about well-being and how important it is. So that's why today is a culmination of that. And I'm so excited to share back with everyone here. And before we go to the next slide, do we want to see the poll results, Andrew? All right. Has your organization? We have never 54. That's exact, kind of about where I expected it to be. 15 have administered one. 23, we have administered well-being, but not regularly. That's also very common. And we are planning to 8%. So if you're planning or you have administered one, this is going to be a great session for you. And even if you have, we'd love to hear what has gone well. What are some of the pitfalls, so that we have this robust discussion? Because let's just be honest, this is very new to many organizations, sparked by a lot of the return to office, work from home, and COVID-19. So I think we're going to have a great session today. So let's just go ahead and dive into first, before I pass it to Dr. Voyles, is, why is this even important, right? And we know we have a poll question coming up that right now, people are just getting burnt out. Like, we have so much data that Dr. Voyles and I are thinking, well, what's the right chart to put in here? And we're like, we don't even need to put in a chart, because I think everyone knows they're burnt out. And you know what? You folks, the people leaders, the one leading the charge, are more burnt out than the employees from our data. It's pretty conclusive to see that. You can see the breakdown of the path is that, we're looking at HR leaders, 14.8% burnt out, 21% languishing. You add those together, more than 1 in 3. It's a tough place to lead. There's empathy fatigue. There's a lot of things going on right now. You can see that second bullet. Over 90% of us on this call, we have some type of empathy fatigue, where we're hearing tough stories from our team and other leaders. And, one, we have to absorb it, because we're human beings. And then 2, we have to think about solutions, about how do we address that. And you know what? Over time, that just weighs on us. So, that's also a challenge, and we should just recognize it and be able to talk about it. And in terms of timing, it couldn't be a better time when we're talking about these big topics, end of year, beginning of year, talking about, getting a baseline about how our team and our employees are doing for a well-being assessment, where we're doing well, where we're not doing well, and then being able to launch programs against that, which Dr. Voyles will go into in much more detail. But let's just look at the poll question here. And we asked which of the following best explains your current state. And let's just compare it against the data we have. Managing, 45%, burnt out, 14. Wow. This is almost exactly like mirroring the poll, if not more, towards the more challenging side. And so this is from Q3, and we're actively analyzing the Q4 data. And I would probably surmise that it'd be even more similar to this. So, we should just recognize that, we are challenged as well as people leaders, and looking for ways that we can get ahead of these issues. Because if your board isn't asking you, or CEO, or if you are the CEO, you're not having these discussions, it will come. So it's good that we're all here together to have a forum to discuss it, to talk about next steps and options moving forward. So now I'm super excited to pass it to, all the research and all the insights behind the scenes, Dr. Voyles, to lead us through the next batch of slides.
Thanks, David. So as he's painted this picture, a lot of us are experiencing burnout and languishing. Employees are too. And in fact, when employees are experiencing these difficulties, it also makes it harder for managers like you. So knowing this at TINYpulse, we've been thinking about how to develop a survey to detect how well your employees are. So these well-being surveys are meant to assess important aspects of your employees' lives so that you can determine the best area to tackle. So I'm going to tell you about the science behind it. And when we were going through this, these slides, David looked at it. He's like, why are there so many things listed in this slide? And I said, it's a deep process. The science takes a long time. This measure has been in the works for months, and we're excited to release it to you today. So the very first step is actually to research what have people done in the past. So we looked at well-being surveys and experiments. David had a huge role in this as he went out and interviewed organizations that are looking to start well-being programs. We drafted items. So we made a huge bank. Over 250 items were tested for this well-being measure. And then we had subject matter experts, industrial organizational psychologists, and business leaders review these items. We finalized a draft, and then we administered it to a sample of participants. After that, I took over and I statistically analyzed it, and I used the survey results to determine what the key drivers and outcomes were for these different types of well-being. Finally, based on that, I refined the survey and finalized the items, and they're ready to go today. So this is what's called the psychometric process. It's a pretty lengthy process, but it's really worth it to have good reliability and validity for your survey. So just to kind of explain how our survey works, it has 4 pillars of well-being. This is based on that research that we did mentioned in the last slide, and it's also based on what we found statistically. We found that work, emotional, financial, and physical all were key parts of employees' lives and of our lives. So these are the ways that we want to measure well-being that will be most impactful. And while we're going through this slide, take a second to answer this poll question about what areas of well-being are most needed in your organization. Now, this is a single choice question, so you can only pick one. I know all of us would want to just pick all of them because all of these things are so important, but which one do you think is most needed? And so while you're looking at this, I'll kind of explain. Work is surrounding the ideas of like being engaged, feeling that your organization cares for you. Emotional is about having that resilience and also having that interconnectedness with other people. Financial is around being able to manage your money and feel comfortable about your financial future. And then the last one is physical, which surrounds nutrition, energy, and fitness. So all of those are key areas for well-being.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, just to add on to what you were sharing, Dr. Voyles, is we know that there's many different ways to slice and dice well-being, right? And I think when we talked internally with all Dr. Voyles and the other PhDs, we just felt that this cut was the simplest to cover the most surface area, and then also I think the ones that are the most popular in terms of wanting to understand and being able to launch programs that improve the outcome.
Oh, these results surprised me a little bit that there aren't any physical well-being, but we do have emotional well-being number 1, which is not a surprise, given, and number 2 is work well-being. Given, the stress that workers are under, especially during the pandemic, especially with some organizations working remote and hybrid, it can result in, a lot of experiences of emotional exhaustion and sometimes isolation. And then we also have financial well-being. If you want, go ahead and drop in the chat why you selected the option that you picked. So why work well-being or why emotional well-being? What is it that you're seeing in your employees that makes you feel that that is the most needed area?
Yeah, I'm super curious, why people feel like, at their company, those are the top areas. But you're right, I'm not surprised, because when we did the research, the quantitative survey, and then the follow-up interviews, number 1 and 2 were work and emotional, like by far, like off the charts compared to financial and physical. Doesn't mean that financial and physical aren't important. It's they were just responding at that period of time. If they only had to choose one, what would be the most popular? And it looks like Amanda, the organization I am with is a social service provider. So staff are experiencing a lot of secondary trauma. +1, I've heard that so much from people working at call centers, retail. It's just there's just a lot of stress, and people are taking it out, unfortunately, on our team members as well. Susan, feedback from the staff are coming to work in my department or have applied for our positions and then leaving other departments. Jill, hi Jill. Heightened emotions around the organization due to stress and being overwhelmed. And let's see, I'll read one more, and then Dr. Voyles, you can love to hear your commentary. Hannah, thank you. I feel like people who are emotionally dysregulated are going to see the effects of that in their physical, emotional lives. If we can address that, it will be easier to tackle the others.
Yeah, I think these are all key points, and most everyone is really hitting on that emotional side. Even if you're talking about work, there's an emotional component to it as well. I would certainly say for service industry or any kind of social services, there's a lot of this kind of trauma, or we call it, the empathy fatigue, where day in and day out they're experiencing these difficult things, they're hearing things, and it's kind of sticking with them. And that's why it's especially important to look at emotional well-being. So I think you're all touching on these huge things. The other thing is, I think the pandemic is becoming kind of an unseen influence. In the very beginning, we were all like, oh man, like, I don't know what to do. I feel stressed. I'm worried. Sudden switch to remote work, the COVID numbers are up. But now we've normalized to it, but there's still this undercurrent of stress that it causes. So I think that's something that kind of taps into that emotional well-being and affects how we are feeling. So to break down how we looked at each of these factors with work, so each one has the factor in the middle, so work, emotional, financial, and physical. And then the little circles are the factors that we used to make up that. So when we looked at work, we looked at organizational care and employee engagement. And then for emotional, goal orientation and resilience and interpersonal. These are all based on research. So we looked at these aspects that feed into the broader category. For example, emotional, having resilience being a big part of it, especially, for example, for those social service workers, they need that resilience to rely on. And then financials, the money management, and physical, I think is very obvious in terms of having that energy. So meaning getting enough sleep, nutrition, and fitness. So these are the sub-factors. But right now we're kind of zoomed out in terms of what these scales and what the survey actually looks like. So I'm going to zoom in on work on the next slide so that you can see we're looking at work overall, but we're breaking it down in terms of how much your organization cares for you and how engaged you are.
Yeah, and while you're transitioning to that slide and going a little deeper, I did see the anonymous attendee. What does a TINYpulse do to ensure well-being of its own employees? Great question. And I'd love to chat about that a little bit later when we talk about this, because we'll certainly lead off to share our experiences of what we're doing, and then hopefully kick off a great conversation as to what other people are doing, or what have you seen that you think that's worth trying out at your organization. So I see that question. I just want to just put it in the holding bin until we're ready to go for it. So thank you, and keep those coming.
Yeah, I love that question. So I'm going to go through work well-being, and then next we're actually going to talk about how we analyze the results. And that's what any organization would want to do when they're determining what kind of interventions to do to support their employees' well-being. So just to show you how this breaks down and to take it from abstract to very concrete, we're looking at work well-being, and on the left side we have organizational care, the index question, which is overall the outcome question. This is that feeling that my employer cares about the health and well-being of its employees. And then all of the questions in blue are the questions that are the drivers. these are the questions that you could tackle. So for example, let's say that you were scoring low in work well-being and you find particularly organizational care. You could then look and say, oh, well, employees aren't feeling valued by their employer. So we need to do something to help employees feel valued. And then on the right side, it's the same thing, but with engagement. So I feel personally engaged in my work is the outcome question. And then all the questions in blue are the drivers. So if you find that an employee is not, or a group of employees is not feeling engaged in their work, then you can look and say, okay, are they overall motivated to do their work? Or do they feel that they have the skills and abilities? And all of this is validated. As I mentioned, we started with over 250 questions, and this is what we've narrowed it down to. This is the example for work well-being. But if you're interested, we can follow up with you to show you financial well-being, physical well-being, and emotional well-being. All right, so this is an overview of the process, and we do the same thing at TINYpulse. I've done the same thing as an independent contractor in the past. What you start with is assessing goals and progress. So you want to look at your organization, what's currently going on. Are you undergoing changes? You want to take into account what the current goals are, and then you want to select the survey. In this case, we're going to look at doing specifically well-being. So you've selected your survey and you've developed questions, or you already have it selected, like with our well-being survey, and then you communicate and administer that survey to employees. The next step, so we'll talk about the first 3 steps on the next slide. And then after that, there's the analysis and coming up with recommendations, which is something that people often struggle with. So I'm going to show you a shortcut to that. And then lastly is enacting change. And we're really going to dig into that for this presentation.
Yeah, and I'll just add on is I think, every survey has those key components that Dr. Voyles pointed out. But I think especially given the climate, and if we're going to administer a well-being assessment, the communication around that is super important. And then also enacting change is more important than ever, because we'd hate to do a survey and because of some internal process or other focus area, we're not able to do anything. Then it just makes it even worse for us. So it's really important to have that tight executive alignment prior to launching something. And that's why the first one is assessing the goals first.
Exactly. So this slide here covers that 1 through 3, the kind of looking at your goals, selecting a survey, and then communicating around that survey. So number 1 step, identify your goals and initiatives. And then next, you want to talk about your survey administration plan. So this is more of a just practical, like, how are you going to do it? Pick a normal time. And then next, most important step is to outline your communication. So describe to your employees why it's important, and then also set up their expectations. Let them know how many questions are in this survey, how long it should be expected that it'll take, whether it's anonymous or confidential. And then also tell them what you plan to do with the results. And then the last step, again, is super important. That's where you're really focusing on how you're going to address anything that arises from the survey. So the best way to go ahead and make sure you're on the right track with this is to determine who's going to champion the solutions. So typically you want a senior leader who's going to be able to propose a plan and carry it through. You can also have a team that helps support. While we're kind of on this note, I'm going to check the chat because it looks like we've had some really interesting comments about this. Okay, Jill said coaching that can help, understand the individual perspective and what needs are within the organization. That's a great way to start, especially with understanding kind of what your employees are experiencing, even before you administer a well-being survey. Yeah, just having one-on-one coaching and talking with your employees to see what their experiences are. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the analysis part. And before we get too deep into that, I want to know, and I think we have a poll question coming up. There it is. What is the expertise level among you and your team when it comes to analyzing survey results? So doing correlation, regression, getting some frequency counts on responses. We have no expertise, very little, some, or a great deal. And while you're answering that, I'll tell you about key driver analysis. So key driver analysis is the shortcut. It's so that you and your team don't have to know correlation or do correlation. You just have to know basically that one item is being looked at in terms of how it affects another item. So we use Kendall-Towles correlation, and it looks at each driver and how it affects those well-being outcomes. So I gave, like with the work example, organization cares about me, and then, for example, how meaningful they feel their work is. And we identify these through the correlation levels. So a higher correlation means it's really high impact, medium, and so on. And here's a chart of the results. Oh, okay. 20% with no expertise. That's okay. KDA will help you, or there are other ways you can do it as well. You also have 28% with very little, 40% with some, and then another 12% with a great deal of expertise. So you're the people who are doing the correlations, doing some of those advanced statistics. If you find that for your organization, you don't have that expertise, or you feel that you don't have the resources or the time, because those are other things that are needed for this analysis, KDA is an awesome solution. So what's nice is it's really intuitive. You can look at this chart, for example, and all of the orange dots represent different survey questions, and they show you which ones you should prioritize, so which ones you should address, and then, for example, which ones you should celebrate, so areas that your organization is doing well in, things to review, and things to maintain.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really like this format is it's super objective, right? You know, at the executive level or the people leader level, you know, where everyone has biases. So we're going to be biased, but yeah, this is just the numbers and the data talking, and it's a great launching point to have those discussions, because there could be some things that you're like, hey, we already have programs on that, or we already did that, or yes, that's nice, and I see it skewing high, but right now we're not in the position to do that. Let's talk about the next level and priority. But it just, you know, this quote, I just love the quote, just takes the legwork out of doing that data analysis, and it just simplifies it and provides this blueprint for you and your team to have really good discussions. And Dr. Voyles, did you want to also share, I know we have clients and prospects of all sizes. There is also, you know, to make the it statistically significant a sample size that each client needs to be able to register, correct?
Yeah, so each client will need at least 30 respondents in their survey. This is so that we can achieve statistical significance. Basically, you need to see enough of those relationships to be able to compare and determine if it's statistically significant. If you don't have enough of those relationships, then it could be just a fluke. So that's why you can't run KDA with fewer than 30. So there just needs to be a big enough sample to find those relationships. And like David said, this is an objective way of doing it. There are a lot of books and experts who tell you, you know, people can lie with statistics, but this is an objective way to go ahead and have it plotted in terms of what the relationships are between your drivers and your outcomes, and then also how your organization is scoring. And it's also really kind of easy to use. So for example, you'll start actually by on the kind of home screen, you'll see the well-being index analysis. And so you have a score right here, which is 3.48 with our sample population. And what you can do is, let's say you administer this every single year, you can actually track, you know, let's say 1 year it's 3.48, and then you have a little dip and it's 3.22, and then you are implementing new interventions and it shoots up to 3.79. So you can kind of track it over time. The other thing, which makes it really easy, is that you can skip the analyses and you have these prioritized items right here. So a lot of organizations will run a survey, they get really excited, everybody responds to it, and then the results just kind of sit, because it's a daunting task to analyze data. I know, I do it all the time, and I still sometimes just digging in, you're like, oh, this is going to take a long time.
Yeah.
So this gives you a shortcut so that you can look and see specifically which questions are going to have the most impact. For our sample population, most days I'm energetic was one of the example items that had a very big impact. In fact, the largest impact. The second most was I easily push away negative thoughts. That was a high impact item. And then exercise is a priority for me. That was another impact item. So these are things that your organization, if you got these results, you might want to focus on. However, you're not obligated to. You can just kind of look at these and see what aligns with your organizational goals and also what you have the resources for. Another awesome thing about kind of getting these results automatically, and that's the other thing, they update in real time. So you have a few more people respond to your survey, you can actually see that they update once you're over 30 respondents. You can cut it by attributes. So you can look at and, for example, compare. So in our sample population, we have people who are assigned to the engineering department. They were scoring the lowest in all of the 4 pillars. But then, for example, it looks like human resources is doing fairly well and customer success is doing fairly well. So you can see, okay, which departments are struggling the most and where should we target our interventions?
Yeah, and I love the heat map and looking at attributes. So if you, I know most of you folks already have this set up. And it's already integrated with your HRIS. And if it's not, please talk to your customer success, or, you can drop it in the chat, put you in the right place. But I always go here and I look at department slices. Then I look at tenure. I'll look at gender. I'm looking at all these things to see, well, which groups are doing well that we should celebrate. And, where, are there some blind spots that I need to be aware of? So when I think about interventions, Dr. Voyles was talking about, areas that might be really high, but I remember talking to a client, they had just acquired a company. So one of their cuts was attributes of the acquired company and the parent company who acquired them. And it was dramatically different. So they were able to target those interventions accordingly, also by the different attributes. So yeah, this is one of my favorite areas to very quickly just start filtering, cutting and slicing to see other insights that I can find.
Yeah, so for example, you might find one department in particular is really struggling with emotional well-being. And that's where you could actually talk with the manager specifically, get some more feedback as well, and then develop an intervention and have those managers make sure that they're providing support for employees in that department. So it's really nice that with these attributes, you can give that targeted solution. Okay. And this is where we're going to have our really big discussion, because I want to hear from all of you as well, because I'm sure you've done some well-being interventions as well. So when we're thinking about well-being, you might find that one of the pillars is lower than the others when you're surveying your organization. So as a reminder, we had work, emotional, financial, and physical. For example, if you found that your work engagement was lower, you could do something by addressing employees' needs for career growth by developing a career pathing program. That's something that we did at TINYpulse. We took one area within TINYpulse and we surveyed employees and developed basically a task analysis to better understand what skills were needed for each level. And then we actually created a form so that employees could track their skill levels and experience to determine what was needed to ascend to the next level. And so it was really concrete and not this nebulous thing of like, what do I need to do to get promoted? Instead, the manager could pull out the form and say, okay, well, you have this skill and you need to develop this. And then you need, about 6 more months of experience in this area. And that could give employees more certainty about their career growth. I'd love to hear in the chat, what kind of things have you done to help support your employees' work well-being? And this can be anything. So it could be supporting their career growth, helping, for example, training. It can be leadership, mentoring, what other programs you have done.
Yeah, and Dr. Voyles, while we're waiting to hear these great examples, or even if you've read about other people, other organizations doing some interesting stuff, please let us know so that we can get the discussion going. But is now a good time to also talk about what our organization does?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's jump in with some examples.
Yeah, so some of the things that Limeade/TINYpulse have done is they have ERG groups around like mentoring, and different slices of work or emotional well-being, and then in I believe it was October and November, We got an extra Friday off just to recharge. So everyone in the organization got it off at the same day, so that everyone can be off grid and enjoy, excuse me, a 3-day weekend. We get a credit for to Fitbits and activity trackers and sleep trackers. And of course, we use our own app on the Limeade side to be able to track that. We've also done, a very common through insurance is EAP, but then also for other cases, we've discussed STD, short-term disability, for folks who are really struggling or going through a tough patch as well, and trying to be super sensitive to that. And I think, someone noted, Jill, you talked about coaching, and I think that's also a backbone, is using Coach one-on-one Pulse to understand how people are feeling, so that you can even broach those conversations like, hey, is STD appropriate given the situation? So those are just some of the things that Limeade has done. Is that enough? No. And I think it's going to be a constant surveying to understand and then improving on that side, since this is such an important topic, and it's also fast changing. So we're always thinking about how we can do more. So, love to hear what other people are thinking. And then also on that note, Dr. Voyles, did I miss any that were top of mind for you?
Those were actually the main ones. I was going to start with the Wellbeing Day, which as an employee, I have to say was amazing to know that I had a day off, and also know that I wasn't coming back to extra emails from people who didn't have the day off. Everyone had the day off. And so it was nice to kind of know that I was just starting fresh. And then the other one, with the Fitbits, that's been great. I've been more thoughtful about sleep and taking enough steps every day. I'm trying to think. There's the goal setting that we do through Limeade. So for example, setting goals for like emotional well-being. I did one for a while that was like on gratitude. So there are a lot of different options. I think we have some in the chat too that have been mentioned.
Yeah, and the other thing is, depending on your size, you're gonna have different resources, different budgets, right? And if you're bigger or publicly traded, you might have Calm or some other programs. And if you're smaller, you might patch it together. It doesn't matter. I think it's just making those, trying to understand and continually adjusting and investing, I think is the key things. And some of these that I see, I'll read these out, Dr. Voyles, and then you can comment on it. Let's see. Susan, if you do a step challenge, don't let all the marathoners be on the same team. +1 on that.
That's a learning experience. Yeah.
I love this one. I think it's Fietta. Schedule wellness counselors for staff to drop in. Wow. And no meeting Friday. That's great. Gina. Hi, Gina. EI training, wellness events, recommendations. Okay, great. Fietta, wellness events, +1. Yeah. So thoughts on that, Dr. Voyles?
Yeah, I think those are awesome ways. And I would say, even, depending on what, wellness event you have, it just shows employees that you care to even be taking those steps. I'd love to hear more details about what organizations did at the wellness events. At a previous organization, we had like a wellness day where, for example, you could get a massage and you'd get like a grab bag of kind of wellness goodies. And you could also tour like poster boards and learn more about nutrition and fitness and things like that. So I'd love to hear what other organizations have done as well. Okay. And while we're waiting for more things in the chat, emotional interpersonal connection is one example of something that could come up. Sometimes, especially during the pandemic, employees might feel distant from one another. So one thing that you could do is establish an organizational wide volunteer day, which is something that TINYpulse has also done. We try to walk the walk, which I think is great. There's also financial money management. So it's very challenging to kind of navigate the process of buying a home. So there could be ERGs around home ownership, or for example, investing. And then physical energy, as we mentioned, the steps or the sleep challenge with incentives for winners. Now, as Susan mentioned, which I think is a great caution, definitely make sure that your marathoners are not all on the same team, because it can be discouraging for other people. You could also have multiple kind of prizes so that you can kind of have like the group from this department who gets one prize, or you can do first, second, third. however you'd like to do to make sure that some of that kind of gets spread around. All right, I think we have another, call map. I'm not familiar with ClassPass. David, do you know that one?
Yeah, you subscribe and then you can go to local gyms, on an all you can eat or a limited basis. It's good if you're traveling, and yeah, that's great. Basically like a more flexible gym membership, if I've got that correct.
Yeah, and certainly what you can offer depends on the organizational resources that you have. But I think making that effort is a big kind of push for employees. The other thing is you can always offer something. There's always kind of some initiative you can do, even with a low budget. For example, like pedometers are very cheap, and that can be used for a STEPS challenge. And so the main thing is that when you do this survey, you want to share back the results from your well-being surveys, along with plans for your initiatives. So, and this is something I like to say, nobody likes to get bad news, but you can definitely make it so that people are receptive if you're offering a solution. So if you say, hey, our employees are really struggling with emotional well-being, but here's what we plan to do. That makes it a lot better, because now you're coming with a person who, you're coming as a person who has bad news, but also like, hey, here's the path forward and here's how we're going to make it better. And then finally, just making employee well-being a priority and showing that it's number one to you is the way to show that your employees that you care. I think that there's been some struggles in organizations with not enough care given to employees. And I think that's driving some of this great resignation. And so just kind of taking that extra step can really be a huge help. And then David has also some examples he wants to share.
Yeah, I talked to many of you folks during the interview, and there's 4 pillars, and conveniently there's 4 quarters, 4 seasons in a year. And people have talked about focusing on 1 per quarter, and which would be great in terms of starting with the priority. But one caveat that I always tell clients, especially people leaders like the folks here on this call, is that we have big hearts and we want to help people. However, then reality hits, like budgeting and priorities from other managers and the executive suite. So I would say that's a great strategy, but always look to just do maybe 1 or 2 things really, really well and earn that trust from the team and the rest of the organization, and then move on to the other one. Because I've seen multiple cases where fast start out of the gate and then it's quicksand, not to their fault, but it just falls apart, and it does become, their challenge. So just keep that in mind. And then in terms of like kicking off something fun, is, I know you don't want all the marathoners in the first group, but if you did physical, for example, as the first one, you could say, well, where's our largest client? Let's have a team, who can walk to our largest client, let's translate it into steps and walk back, or, walk there. So, there's a lot of things that we can do to tie it back into the organization as well. But I would just say, showing you care is like, explaining the survey, explaining the results, and then actually following through on it. And less is more on that until, we've earned that right and that trust.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. We had this really good question in the chat that I want to draw attention to. It's from Carrie, asking basically what suggestions we could offer for appealing to management, who thinks basically they kind of shrug employee well-being away and say, oh, it's up to the employee. It's up to them whether they take care of themselves. What would you recommend, David?
Yeah, well, first, I think this is probably a very common mindset prior to COVID, right? People just, I knew it was important, but I've never spent so much time talking about it because I can see the firsthand collateral damage. And it's up to you. Do you want to pay the principal, or do you want to pay the principal plus interest, or do you just want to pay the interest and it just gets worse and worse? And I think that, there's the research is conclusive that there's a link, especially now if you're working from home, and the challenges that people have. So, we have tons of research, Carrie, on that front, like the state of employee engagement. If you drop your email, we can forward that to you if you don't have that. Or in addition, of course, you'll get these slides, but just even doing this assessment with the key driver analysis, it's the data that's speaking, and then it's their choice, right? Yes, you can't push a boulder up a mountain, but it's their choice. Do they want? But I think it's pretty conclusive in the popular literature, the popular empirical evidence, and then plus, if you do this assessment, you'll also have empirical evidence in your own organization.
And I would add that you can further support this with evidence of, for example, employee absenteeism. So if you've noticed an uptick in absenteeism, you could say, employees are basically being driven to the point to where, even if they aren't ready to take a break, they're being forced to because of their emotional or physical health. The other thing you could point to is turnover as well. Employees who are feeling burned out are more likely to turn over, and you can show them that this, like David said, it's an investment. And so, yeah, just to kind of wrap it up here in terms of showing that you care, it empowers a positive change in your organization. And not only is it good for your organization and for your employees, it's the right thing to do. So we'll go ahead and open it up to any other questions, or if you would like to jump on and have a chat with us as well, we'd love to hear from you.
Certainly. And while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I know that different organizations have different levels of kind of statistical background or approach to analyzing data. So people have asked me this a lot, and so I'll just make sure that I address that. And if you're interested in, Dr. Voyles also does consultation for a small subset of clients. So if you're interested in getting a proposal on that side, and from a third party unbiased that's intimately familiar with how TINYpulse works, you can just put it in the chat, and we can follow up accordingly to see if there's going to be a fit for you and your organization. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up. And so let's talk a little bit while people are coming in and putting questions here is, well, how does this work? So if you have TINYpulse and you're an admin, you go to the survey view content library and you look at the template, it is in there now. You will see that the well-being survey is in there. Obviously, I would not press launch right now because, as we know, we have to get alignment on the goals and we have to communicate it accordingly with the internal folks, especially if you've just launched the annual survey or you're thinking about, you want to think about the timing between the two. I mean, they're both different for different purposes, but that's the number one part of that 5-step process is, what are the goals that you're trying to accomplish first and foremost? And then, like I think Carrie's saying, getting that critical alignment with the executive team, because the worst thing we do, we launch the survey and we take no action, right? That's the opposite of care. Right? So we would certainly want to avoid that.
Yeah, and the timing is right, depending on kind of the pace at your organization, to where you could go ahead and start reviewing your goals for next year and determining what your communication plan would be, and actually launch the survey in January, for example, once your employees have returned from the holidays.
Yeah, and that's also very common, right? If you do the annual engagement survey and its well-being scores very low, then it's a very natural follow-up step. We've done that before where we launched an annual survey and manager effectiveness, that category was very low. So we did a follow-up survey to dig deeper into how do we improve manager effectiveness? And then we pulsed on a quarterly basis to see if we were improving. So Joe's got a great question. Once we get the response back from the survey, can we schedule a meeting with someone at TINYpulse on suggestions of action items? And yes, if you're a client, you will have a CSM, depending on the level of service. Definitely, they will be experts in terms of helping you navigate the site and the insights and the KDA and having that discussion. Now, if you wanted more upon that and thinking about services or programs to launch, or how to slice and dice that, then that usually goes into the Dr. Voyles' realm, and we can talk about that. But you will certainly, I know your team is super focused and really cares, and you have a very strong team. So that probably is all you need to get started using that and KDA to get up to a really fast running start. And so, Dr. Voyles, since we have, question, Carrie says, curious about the 100% anonymity of employee engagement surveys. I have a feeling people are polite in surveys because they don't believe it's 100% anonymous. Did you want to address that, or did you want me to?
I'll start and then I'll have you kind of add in your take as well.
Yeah.
Anonymous and confidential surveys can be tricky. So I will definitely acknowledge that and say that you have a great question there. Especially, I don't know, it depends on the organization, but in organizations, if there's been kind of a history of lack of trust in leadership, it can be especially dicey. For any organization, it does help to have a third party administer the survey, whether it's TINYpulse or, like, for example, a consultant. That way they know, like, oh, HR isn't like collecting this survey and matching our IP addresses or whatever it might be. Um, I would say explain to employees how the data is collected so that they can actually see, that the process is anonymous. The other thing that I would say is to kind of demonstrate that you're only looking at it in terms of groups, so they can't be personally identified, and that you're looking for their true feedback so that you can make changes. I would definitely approach your communication and your messaging around the idea of help us by giving us constructive feedback so that we can do a better job. I think that's the right message to put forward so that employees are ready to kind of give some negative feedback, but in a way that's very useful for your organization. David.
Yeah, and so Carrie, great question. When I started TINYpulse about a dozen years ago, that was the foundation, was anonymity. I felt that with anonymity, you will get the best feedback. And I think that's true, to your point. Now, since then, we've added more and more functionality. So you can also do confidential, and you can also do visible surveys as well. But if you want to get the best feedback, of course, you go anonymity. And I think that's one of the powers of having a third party. Like, why do we pay for third-party software, right? When we could probably jerry rig it together. Well, part of it is that unbiasedness, right? We know it's not SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, and having that KDA and having it all built for this purpose is also very important. And that's something that we stand by. And I've had interactions with clients and other folks on this front, and we take it extremely seriously around that anonymity. But I think more important is what Dr. Voyles mentioned. It's just that undercurrent, right? If that trust has been ruptured, it's really hard to put back together. So that communications in the beginning is extremely important, is about learning more about your well-being so that we can make better decisions for the organization and you as a whole. Yeah, you bet.
I'll pause a little bit longer. Oh, I see another one coming up.
Dr. Voyles, we do have an email that just came in from someone before. So let's jump into Hannah's, and we can I can read out that question.
Sure. Okay. For Hannah, Hannah's asking, who can I ask to get the high predictor questions for each of the 4 pillars that Dr. Voyles mentioned? You're in luck. I can show you now. So I think by high predictor, you mean like the index questions. Is that right? If you, here, I'll go ahead and show them to you. So let me go back. For the work one, we break it down into organizational care. So that kind of high level, the index one is this: my employer cares about the health and well-being of its employees. And then engagement, I feel personally engaged in my work. So those are for the work. And then we'll go and look at the other ones really fast.
I think it's 18, 19, and 20.
Yep. For emotional well-being, resilience. Oh no, I didn't put them. Oh, this was in the appendix. Hold on. I'm going to follow up with you, Hannah. Yeah, I didn't put the index questions. I put the other questions for
you
those.
have the index question for 19 and 20, the financial.
I do.
And the,
yeah. Yeah. Okay. We'll skip emotional for now. I feel confident about my financial security is the money management one, which is for financial. And then for physical energy, in general, I wake up feeling rested. Nutrition, I maintain healthy eating habits. And fitness, I am physically fit. So those are the questions there. For the emotional, I can look them up. So I'll follow up with you through email.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And those outcome questions, there's a million, like we discussed earlier, a million different ways to slice and dice it or choose different pillars. But Dr. Voyles did all the research and in the common literature and publications, and those are the most standardized and then also trending with the current times. Is that correct, Dr. Voyles?
Yeah. So those are the ones that basically we tie all the predictors to, and it's very relevant for the current times and for particularly employees.
Okay, Andrew, did you say you had one on email? Because I see.
I think this is actually a really good example of someone who's clearly being vulnerable with us today. So
Okay.
yeah, so this person wrote in anonymously and wanted to answer anonymously as, hey, so an employee of ours was dismissed and is coming back now, trying to use legal action, saying that they were dismissed for stress and anxiety. What are your reactions to this? And there's a second part of this question, but first of all, it's clearly legal has gotten involved, but if you have a reaction to this, and it seems like they're struggling with this and may be looking for some guidance.
My number one thought was, you definitely want to have your organization's attorney review all the communications that you've had with that employee, everything you've documented, and then also have them review what the former employee is claiming. I would say that's number one. My other inclination is that you should find out if that employee ever documented this stress and anxiety, or if they had a diagnosis that they informed the employer of, because then that does fall into a disability, and so that it's a protected class. I'm kind of getting the sense this is more of a legal question rather than supporting well-being. Is there more to supporting the well-being?
Yeah, so the other question is just, how irresponsible are employers for employee wellness, mental health? How responsible are employers for employee mental health and well-being? It sounds to me like this is wrapped up in a similar issue, which is perhaps emotional mental health, but how responsible are employers?
That's a tough question. So is the former employee kind of making the assertion that the organization is responsible for their stress?
Well, it sounds to me like that now the question goes to, well, how responsible are we for this? I mean, we could go to the extent of investing in programs like this, or we could do nothing at all. But just broadly speaking, I mean, we would say yes, we are responsible, or we are taking responsibility. Let's put it that way. But in general, how responsible are we? I know, David, you might have an opinion on this one.
Yeah, I think someone asked or remarked earlier, like, oh, aren't people and they're responsible for their own behaviors and actions? And so that's obviously a common recourse. And my thought about it right now is that because, well, one, it's common sense. We're losing people at an alarming rate because of the Great Resignation, people quitting on TikTok, blah, 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 all that stuff. So I think it behooves us to put the programs and mechanisms in place. So if that person needs that, they have that as an option. For example, if they're really stressed out, there's like a meditation app, or there's avenues for that person that he or she can choose to do, because sometimes it just takes the timing could be wrong for that person. So that's my thought is, like, we can't force people to do anything, but we can have discussions, and we can have the programs and mechanisms in place to support them when the time is right for them, or when they feel it's right for themselves.
And I would just add on to that having these programs in place is a good faith offering to your employees. It's much harder for them to say, my organization stresses me out, and they don't care, when you show that you clearly are, as an organization, making this effort to support employees.
Yeah, and I also think that, the importance of one-on-ones, especially if we're remote and, we're Zooming each other or Teamsing each other, is just more important than ever. Is it being documented there? Are those conversations happening? And that's, I think, why, our offering around Coach One-on-One Pulse is more and more popular, is because people need that connective tissue and they need that structure because they're not used to it. And they go from scattered to being structured and being from reluctant to ready in these one-on-ones.
Right on.
I want to jump
a couple
to
more questions from
yeah.
Chad and Infita as well.
Yeah, I want to jump to Chad's question really fast. He's asking, what are our thoughts on exit interviews? Now, I did a webinar about stay interviews, which I think are great for preventing good employees from turning over. I would say exit interviews also play a great role. Yeah. It's an opportunity to get your employees typically more honest feedback, because a lot of times when they're leaving, they probably already have a job lined up and they may be more willing to be forthcoming with you and explain why they are leaving. So it's a great way to kind of look back and dive in deep to understand what their thought process is.
Yeah, definitely plus one on that. And I think highly encourage exit interviews, especially in this environment, because it could be like, oh, this other company is offering me more holistic well-being support, or offering X and Y that we can use to get better and raise the bar on our own side. And then Dr. Voyles, Fietta, so you asked in the Q&A, how do I reach out for survey analysis? You can just put your email in the chat, or you can just email Dear Andrew at TINYpulse, and we can follow up and discuss what that may look like. And then you also asked, how often should I survey fatigue? And I'm also thinking about workplace experience and behaviors to track besides wellness. Are there any other trending categories that we should watch out for? So why don't I pass the baton to you, Dr. Voyles?
Okay, I'm going to go quick so we can respect everyone's time, but I definitely want to answer these questions for Fietta. How often should we survey? It depends on how quickly your organization can keep up. I would definitely be wary of more than 2 large surveys in a given year. I'd start to kind of pump the brakes a little bit. But what's most important is that you are administering surveys at a cadence where you can keep up with sharing back the results and proposing and implementing interventions. And then to jump to your other question, thinking about what other employee experiences and behaviors to track. Yeah, David, what do you think?
Well, I think we have a great brain trust here. I would just say that one of the things I think is very interesting is people are starting to hire ahead of remote work. I know we just did at Limeade TINYpulse. So I think that is like, how do we optimize it? And especially as we sooner or later, hopefully return to office, how do we balance that pendulum? I think it's going to be more important than ever. Like, do you pay them the same if there are one's in New York and one's in Tulsa, where I used to live? Obviously, cost of living is dramatically different. So, but with that, we're running on time. I want to make sure that people get to the next meeting. Please have a happy holidays, and then also fill out that survey form. It helps me and Dr. Voyles get better at what we do and provide the content that you folks are looking for. And you'll get the recordings after this as well, so you can have those robust internal discussions. Anything else I missed, Andrew?
Well, thanks so much, David. I want to thank you all for being here today. Jump to your next slot. We'll see you next time on Tiny Webinars. Don't forget to sign up. I've got you all folks who signed up in the chat, but you'll hear from us very shortly, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Until then, to happy employers.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
Happy holidays.